The sound of metal against flesh never came. Only laughter echoed across the steel-grit floor of the training dome. She stood tall, glowing with confidence, gleaming in her armor. Violet eyes narrowed beneath obsidian plating. Alishi, daughter of the Zy warlords, had faced beasts that devoured suns and hunted shadows across galaxies. Yet here she was, amused by a human spinning what looked like two sticks tied with a rope. Nunchucks, they called them. She tilted her head, then laughed. Not out of joy, out of disbelief. You think that can penetrate Zy alloy? She smirked, her voice sharp enough to pierce silence. Around them, soldiers from both worlds watched. Some smirked, others whispered. Human and alien alike gathered in this uneasy alliance. A fragile peace built on bruised egos and unresolved war scars. Colter didn't speak. He never did much. That was his way. Barefoot on the cold floor, he held the ancient weapon lightly, letting it spin, slow at first, then faster with quiet precision. No armor, no implants, no glowing enhancements, just skin, calm breath, and movement honed through time. He looked like a man out of place, out of his league, but there was something unsettling in his stillness, like a blade that hadn't unsheathed yet. The voice of the AI judge crackled above. Begin. Alishi stepped forward, still smiling. She didn't even draw her blade, just activated the kinetic field on her fists. This was a game to her, an easy lesson to teach a primitive species that not all alliances meant equality. He stood motionless, watching. The silence stretched between them, and for a second, just a blink. She faltered. His eyes met hers, steady, unblinking, not afraid, not proud, prepared. She lunged. Her first strike missed. He swayed back, the nunchucks twirling effortlessly, almost lazily. She laughed again. This is what humans send to train with warriors? Then came the blur. A whip of movement so fast her sensors couldn't track it. Something struck her left shoulder. Not hard but precise. Her armor vibrated, registering impact. Then again. Another strike. Lower this time. She stumbled back. Not from damage but from shock. Colter still hadn't spoken. He moved like water, but every strike hit exactly where it needed to. Not for pain. For dismantling. Gasps echoed from the sidelines. Alishi's smirk began to tremble. Her pride had brought her here. Her arrogance was what moved her. But now she wasn't moving with confidence. She was reacting. And he, this quiet, weaponless human, was in control. She took a deeper breath. This was no longer training. This was a lesson. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't the one giving it. Long before their feet touched the same arena floor, their worlds had already collided. Colter was born under a sky of concrete and conflict. Post-war Earth, where silence was rare and survival came before pride. Cities had been rebuilt, alliances forged from ashes. But the fear hadn't vanished. It had only changed form. The Zy didn't come to conquer Earth with fire. They came with offers. Technology, medicine, peace for a price. Integration, they called it. To the Zy it was diplomacy. To many humans, it felt like assimilation. Colter had grown up watching Earth's leaders bow to aliens in golden armor, to beings who spoke in poetry but walked like kings. While others reached out with open hands, Colter gripped tradition tightly in his fist. He studied what most forgot: martial arts, ancient weaponry, control of the body. Not because it was trendy, but because he believed one day, Earth would need to remember who it was before the stars arrived. Alishi's world was the opposite. She came from Zyron 5, a planet where honor was bred into blood. Warriors were forged in towering academies, tested by holographic war gods and real battlefields. Her people believed power wasn't just strength, it was heritage. Combat was their culture. Precision was their religion. She had never lost a duel. Alishi didn't hate humans. She pitied them. They were clever, sure. Resilient, even. But they were soft. Emotionally noisy. They argued with their hearts and carried weapons that hadn't evolved in centuries. When she arrived on Earth for joint tactical training, She expected interesting data, perhaps some tactical surprises. She didn't expect to feel challenged. Certainly not by someone like him. Colter didn't look like a warrior. He didn't speak like one. No posturing, no rank boasting, no elaborate armor. Just a calm presence and those ridiculous weapons. The first time she saw him training with the nunchucks, she laughed under her breath. Spinning sticks? Against ZY carry armor? She had been forged in the fire of plasma wars. His world had barely stepped off its own moon. But there was something different about him. Something that didn't fit her calculations. It wasn't in his strength or speed. It was in his restraint. He didn't train for show. He didn't need an audience. He moved as if the entire universe had narrowed to the rhythm of his breathing. That annoyed her more than she wanted to admit. And so, when the AI posted the schedule for demonstration duels, Alishi stepped forward. Volunteered. Publicly. Loudly. She wanted to remind the humans and perhaps herself who held the real power in this alliance. The arena wasn't built for war. It was built for understanding. Dome-shaped, lined with sensors, broadcasting feeds to both ZY carry fleets and Earth command posts. The duel was symbolic, controlled. No lethal strikes, no lasting injuries. But pride doesn't follow protocol. When the match was announced, soldiers buzzed with anticipation. Not because they expected a spectacle, because they didn't. Most believed it would be over in seconds. She would dodge his wooden toys, disable him, maybe break a few ribs, then help him up with a grin and a reminder, "You're not there yet." But Colter didn't play by their script. The moment he entered the arena, the air shifted, not by power but by presence. He bowed once, said nothing. She smirked. What the crowd didn't see was what both of them already understood. This wasn't just two fighters testing skill. This was two worlds testing belief. For Alishi, the duel would reaffirm what she'd always known, that Earth was lucky to be protected. For Colter, it was a silent message not just to her, but to all watching. We don't need your armor to be strong. The moment the AI called begin, the arena stopped being a training ground. It became a proving ground. Alien strength versus human precision. Galactic pride versus ancient discipline. And somewhere in between, something was about to break. Not just armor, but perspective. The first few seconds of the duel were almost theatrical, at least to the spectators. Alishi advanced like royalty. Not rushed. Not reckless. Every step was deliberate. Her armored boots clicking against the polished arena floor with a quiet confidence that bordered on arrogance. Her plasma knuckle gloves hummed faintly as they powered up, their electric blue glow casting a sharp light across her chest plate. Colter remained still. His eyes followed her, unreadable. Nunchucks swinging gently from his hands like a pendulum waiting to break rhythm. He didn't flinch. He didn't posture. He simply waited. The moment she struck, she did so with the speed of a meteor. A single punch, straight and vicious, intended to end the duel before it began. She wasn't holding back. She wanted to humble him fast, clean, and public. But her fist met air. Colter had already shifted, weight gliding sideways, letting her strike pass inches from his ribs. In the same breath, the nunchucks flicked upward, not to strike her, but to test distance. She noticed. For the first time, Alishi blinked. There was no wasted motion in him. No panic. Just flow, measured and precise. She countered with a spinning kick, following through with a back fist aimed at his temple. He ducked. Not just quickly, but elegantly. As if he'd seen that move before she'd even committed to it. And then he tapped her shoulder. Lightly. It wasn't even a hit. More like a brush. But her armor registered it as contact. A warning. Alishi's jaw clenched. She launched another flurry, blinding, brutal, designed to overwhelm. Her fists moved in streaks, her strength amplified by years of enhancement training. This was how she defeated dozens of foes. Alien beasts, augmented assassins, rebel kings, speed and power, precision through pressure. But Colter didn't resist her force. He danced with it. He twisted, ducked, pivoted. The nunchucks became an extension of his breath. They whirled in tight arcs and sharp lashes. Never random, never wasteful. Each swing wasn't to hurt, but to test, to push her balance off-center. She landed nothing, and when she thought she had an opening, she found herself striking empty air. It didn't make sense. No human should be able to read her this clearly. Not without tech. Not without augmentation. She took a half step back. And that was when he struck. A crack of wood against alloy. Not brutal. Not showy. But targeted. Just beneath her ribplate. A seam. The armor vibrated violently. Then another hit, lower spine. Just above her beltline. She spun instinctively, off balance, and his foot swept behind hers. She didn't fall, but she stumbled. The ZY carry never stumble. Gasps echoed from the audience, both human and alien. Alishi's mouth tightened. Her cheeks flushed. Not from injury, but something far worse for a warrior of her rank. Disbelief. She had underestimated him. Not his weapon. Not his speed. His clarity. Every move he made was a message. Every strike was a sentence in a language she didn't understand, but deeply felt. He wasn't just fighting. He was teaching, and she hated it. With a frustrated yell, she charged. Full force. Her right fist glowing brighter, plasma at maximum. She raised it high, ready to bring it down like thunder, but she never landed it. The nunchucks wrapped around her forearm mid-strike. He twisted. Her balance shattered. Her knee buckled, and she fell, not flat, but on one hand, armor scraping loudly as she steadied herself. Silence followed. Alishi stared at the floor. And Colter? He took a single step back. He didn't raise his weapon. Didn't prepare for another attack. He simply waited again, inviting her to stand or walk away. That moment lasted forever. It wasn't a win by force. It was a fracture in pride. Not because he had broken her body, because he had broken the illusion. She wasn't facing a primitive man. She was facing a master of an art lost to the stars. And now, for the first time in her decorated career, she wasn't sure what her next move should be. The air inside the arena had changed. It was no longer filled with the hum of energy fields or the low murmur of the audience. It was dense now, thick with realization. The kind of silence that settles over a battlefield just before history is written. Alishi slowly rose to her feet. Not because she had to, because pride demanded it. Her arm trembled subtly, beneath the obsidian plates of her armor. Not from pain, but from the undeniable knowledge sinking into her bones. She was no longer leading this fight. She was surviving it. Colter stood across from her, unmoving, nunchucks resting gently in one hand. He didn't press, didn't provoke. He waited, as if offering her one last chance to walk away with dignity. She refused. Without a word, she reactivated her gauntlets. The blue plasma flickered once more, hotter now, wild around her fists. The sensors embedded in her suit began recalibrating, locking onto his vitals, adjusting for movement patterns. She fed the system new algorithms mid-combat. This time, she would calculate him. She surged forward, faster than before. She roared, her fist slicing through the air toward his jaw. And in that exact moment, he moved. But this time, it wasn't to dodge. It was to end. With a calm inhale, Colter rotated his wrist, the nunchucks flicking into motion with terrifying elegance. One moment, they blurred like a storm. The next, crack. The strike landed not with brute force, but with devastating precision. Right at the neck seam of her chest plate, where the armor met flesh, where no AI calculation could compensate. Her entire body jolted as the armor's internal systems shorted. Sparks scattered from her shoulders, blinking red alerts flooding her HUD. The ZY carry alloy, supposedly unbreachable by any weapon below Class 5, now bore a splintered scar. Before she could recover, another strike followed, lower, sweeping across the waist joint. And another, spinning behind her, striking the back of her knee with an untraceable whip. 3 hits, each like punctuation, each like a forgotten truth spoken aloud. Her body folded, not from pain but from overwhelming shock. Her systems disengaged. The once proud armor, designed to survive deep space combat and kinetic warfare, fractured, deactivated, and fell apart in clicking pieces around her. Alisher dropped to one knee, breath ragged, eyes wide. No blood, no injury, just defeat, complete, pure. The kind that strips you not of health, but of illusion. The crowd gasped, stunned into silence. Even the Zy soldiers, those trained never to show emotion, leaned forward, their disbelief visible. Colter didn't move toward her. He didn't raise his weapon. He simply stood there, breathing softly, watching her. For the first time, she looked at him not as an opponent, but as something else. A mirror, a warning, a quiet, walking reminder that power wasn't always loud, and that control, when wielded with intent, could silence even the mightiest thunder. Her fingers curled into the floor, grasping the cold surface as if she were trying to ground herself in this new reality. She had laughed at him, mocked his weapon, dismissed his discipline, and now she sat, unharmed, unbroken, but completely defeated. She looked up at him, not with rage, not with shame, but with something she hadn't shown any other human since her arrival on Earth. Respect. He took a step forward, not aggressive, not triumphant. And then he spoke finally. His voice was calm, low, gentle. Your armor was strong, but strength doesn't make something unbreakable. Knowing when not to break does. She blinked slowly. Those words didn't just sting. They stayed. She nodded once, wordlessly, accepting what her pride wouldn't let her admit out loud. Not yet, but the crack had formed. Not just in her armor, in everything she thought she knew. The training dome remained silent long after the duel had ended. No cheers, no jeers, just the weight of what had happened settling into every observer like a slow-moving storm. Alisher didn't rise immediately. She sat on one knee, fragments of her armor scattered around her like pieces of a broken identity. Her shoulders heaved slightly, not from exhaustion, but from something far more difficult to process. Acceptance. Across from her, Colter stood motionless. He wasn't basking in victory. There was no gloating in his posture, no celebration in his eyes. If anything, there was empathy, not pity, understanding. Their eyes met again, not as rivals, not as competitors, but as two beings from entirely different galaxies who had suddenly found common ground. No translator could capture what passed between them in that moment. Words would have only cheapened it. This was a language older than either of them. The language of respect. She finally stood, slow, controlled, no longer trying to project dominance, no longer pretending superiority, just standing. Colter gave a short nod, barely visible, as if to say, "You're still whole." She returned it, and for the first time, the tension between them didn't feel like a threat. Felt like balance. The arena lights dimmed, signaling the end of the demonstration. The AI's voice crackled overhead with a clinical tone. Duel concluded. No injuries. Result. Human, Colter, victorious. Alishi's squad stood in stunned silence, unsure of how to respond. Even the Zy commander, who had trained her since adolescence, looked away, as if searching for a reason to explain what had just unfolded. But Alisher didn't search for reasons. She had found one. Later, outside the dome, the air was cool. Artificial wind moved through the metallic courtyards of Earth's joint training base. Distant drones hummed above, and soldiers returned to their routines. But something unspoken had changed. Word of the duel spread quickly. Some exaggerated, some denied, but none dismissed. Colter sat alone beneath a dim sky, his nunchucks resting beside him, wrapped in cloth as though they were sacred. He stared at the stars, not as something to conquer, but something to coexist with. Alisher approached, unarmored, wearing a neutral training uniform. No entourage, no weapon, just her. He noticed her presence before she spoke, but still he waited. She stood beside him for several seconds before finally saying, "You embarrassed me." He didn't answer. She turned to face him fully. "But you didn't humiliate me." He looked up at her. There was no smirk, no reaction, just patience. "You could have broken me," she continued, "but you didn't." Colter finally spoke, his voice as quiet as the wind. I wasn't there to prove you wrong. Only to remind you we're still here. She looked down at the cloth-wrapped nunchucks. That weapon, it's so simple. And yet, it moved like it had its own mind. Colter shook his head gently. It doesn't think. It listens. She let out a breath, half sigh, half laugh. I never thought I'd learn from a human. Neither did I, he replied. She smiled faintly. A real smile. The kind that doesn't need victory to exist. Then she sat beside him. Not because of duty, but because silence now felt like something they could share. For the next few minutes, neither of them spoke. They simply looked up, together at the endless sky. Two warriors from two worlds, each raised on opposite stories of power, now sitting side by side as students of one another. No armor, no ego, only understanding. Morning came with a different kind of silence. Not the tense, expectant quiet of a duel, but a calm that follows a storm once everything has changed. The training base stirred slowly, its routines intact, but beneath them something fundamental had shifted, like gravity had subtly realigned. Alishi stood in the center of the empty dome, now fully repaired, its surface polished clean of yesterday's fragments. She wore no armor, no title, just a loose training robe, simple and quiet. In her hand were two short sticks, connected by a cord. Wooden, handmade. Colter watched her from the far edge of the arena. Arms folded, eyes steady. He didn't approach, didn't instruct. He only watched. She stood still for a long moment, letting the nunchucks rest against her side. Then slowly she raised them and tried to spin. Clumsy, unbalanced, but focused. The motion lacked rhythm but not will. She tried again. The weapon slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. She sighed, bent to pick it up, then paused when she heard footsteps. Colter stepped forward, calm as always. You're leading with your shoulders, he said gently. Let them follow your breath, not your pride. Alishi nodded, the words hitting deeper than they should. He took a position beside her, mimicking the motion with his own set. Not commanding, just sharing. They moved in silence. The sticks spun. The rhythm came slow then steadier. Alishi didn't laugh anymore. Not at the weapon. Not at him. She had begun to listen, to feel. And for the first time, she understood what she'd missed all along. This wasn't about tools, or power, or technology. This was about presence, about control, about knowing when to move and when not to. Over the next few days, they trained together in quiet corners of the base, away from the spectators. The others noticed, of course. Whispers spread, some amused, some skeptical. A Zy war-born learning from a Terran? But no one interrupted. Respect has its own gravity. She learned quickly, not because of her natural skill, but because she had let go of the belief that she already knew enough. He taught her not just how to strike, but when not to, how to breathe with the motion, how to understand the intention behind every movement. And slowly, she began to see herself in him, not as a rival, as an equal. Their connection grew not from words, but from motion, from trust earned in silence and gestures. She started sharing stories, about her home world, about the stars, about the weight of legacy. He listened without judgment. He shared little about his past, but what he did share was honest, grounded, human. One evening, as they walked side by side along the base's outer perimeter, she asked him, "Do you think our worlds can really trust each other?" Colter looked up at the night sky. "I don't think it starts with worlds," he said. "I think it starts with people." She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Their silence had already spoken enough. That night, a new schedule appeared on the shared command network, Joint Defense Strategy Trials, Mixed Species Units. Alishi's name was paired with Colter's. Some called it a publicity stunt. Others called it madness. But neither of them flinched. They stood together at the briefing side by side, not as representatives of their species, but as warriors who had already fought the hardest battle against their own assumptions. As they prepared to depart for their first mission together, Colter handed her something small. It was a new pair of nunchucks, Handcrafted, balanced, infused with a thin ZY-carry alloy. Not Earth's, not Zyron's. Something new, something shared. She looked at him, then down at the gift. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." He simply nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. As the transport lifted off, engines humming, the two warriors stood together in silence. And for the first time, not just on Earth but perhaps in all the history of both their peoples, something real had begun. Not just peace, but understanding. The kind that doesn't come from treaties. The kind that comes from respect earned, one strike at a time.